Okay, hi, hello. You know what time it is if you are here. It is time to talk about August anticipated releases, and hopefully will be our last anticipated release video for the year in front of this wall, but I don't control the weather. So let's get into it. Broad overview, this is another month that was initially kind of underwhelming for me at first perusal because I was expecting this to be the kind of shoot off of the fall publishing push, but when actually sitting back and looking at the titles that are coming out this month, there is actually, as usual, quite a lot, and there are some that I am very, very excited for. So we're starting with the first this month as it lands on a Tuesday, and as we know here, Tuesdays are a new book day. And the first book that we're going to talk about this month, I'm going to go out on a limb and say I am not the only one anticipating, based on the fact that the first book in this series I did a Feature Friday on, and it's one of my most popular Feature Fridays just in terms of views. And that book is Tastes Like SHAKKAR by Nisha Sharma, which is her follow-up to Dating Dr. Dill, the second in the If Shakespeare Was an Auntie series. The first being obviously, well, not obviously, the first being a retelling of The Taming of the Shrew, this being a retelling of Much Ado About Nothing, and the wedding at the center of this retelling and Bobby and Bunty's love story is Karina and Prem's wedding, which I think is a great way to bring those characters back and keep everything tied together. I was not surprised by this being a Much Ado About Nothing retelling. I don't remember if I speculated on what I thought the retellings were based on the names that were introduced in Dating Dr. Dill, but with two B names with Bobby and Bunty, you have pretty high odds that we're retelling Benedict and Beatrice here. So I'm very excited to see what this is going to be. I think it's going to be full of as much humor and heart as the first one, with a little bit of snark and antagonism and just that kind of spark and bite that I think really elevated the first one. And I don't think that that spark and bite was only because it was a retelling of The Taming of the Shrew. I'm also very interested because there were major plot differences and beats that had to be kind of reconfigured from The Taming of the Shrew to Dating Dr. Dill, which we talked about more extensively, not super extensively, but at least more in that video, that Feature Friday, because the ending of The Taming of the Shrew is not super kind to its heroine. And so that has to be kind of remaneuvered for a modern audience and for a romance audience. So I'm interested to see if there's going to be similar maneuvering here to Much Ado About Nothing. There isn't necessarily, to my recollection, as glaring of moments as there are in The Taming of the Shrew that need kind of maneuvering from or to or for a modern audience, but there is that potential still. And going back to that idea of that bite, that is one of the best things about Much Ado About Nothing as a play, period. So I'm very, very excited to see how that is utilized by Sharma in her kind of context and world, because I think it's going to fit right in. And then I'm very excited to see how we're setting up the next book, which I believe, and I'm pretty sure she's confirmed at this point, is going to be a 12th Night book. If I've got that wrong, let me know. And then we have the beginning of a new series by S.J. Jones, the series being Guardians of Dawn, the book being Zara, and the copy blurbs it as Cinder meets Sailor Moon. It involves a world in which magicians are blamed for a plague of monsters and a protagonist who is hiding magical ability while also dealing with a stepmother. Hence, I assume the Cinderella tie-ins, but monsters are on the rise and our protagonist has a run-in with a mysterious fellow who puts her in contact with the resistance movement of magicians fighting these monsters. So if you're looking for magic and presumably a little romance with this kind of idea of like a bigger bad and kind of epic quest, I think that this seems like it's going to be a very compelling start to a new series with a little bit of a wider scope. Additionally, while I haven't been as familiar with S.J. Jones's work recently, or I don't know if she has published anything since the Winter Song duology, but I really enjoyed the Winter Song duology, so I'm interested to see how her voice is going to be different here, what kind of evolution as a writer we're going to see, and especially because so much time has passed since that duology, especially within the young adult landscape. Like, I'm constantly reminded that generations move much quicker in young adult because people, readers, are growing out of that age bracket, regardless of the fact that we are seeing more adult readers of young adult than ever. although I really only have anecdotal evidence to back that up, but we are seeing a lot of those conversations about length of YA kind of pushing out younger readers and the cost of YA for its target demographic and all of these conversations. So I think it has been a long time, at least since I want to say 2013, that we've been kind of having these conversations, or these conversations have been percolating. But that being said, we do still have these generations of young adult reader, in theory, that are moving through these authors, and so we will be reaching out to a different generation of reader here. And then we have the highly anticipated adult debut from Elizabeth Acevedo, Family Lore. This follows a woman who can see the exact day of death and decides to host a living wake for her family, and her family isn't quite sure, and she is not quite revealing whether she is seeing her own death, whether she is seeing someone else's death, and so it brings this family back together, and their stories intertwine and weave together in a really, I'm assuming, magical way. And this is the kind of book that's going to get me to buy into multi-generational, which I don't gravitate to as much generally as I know a lot of readers do. I know it's hugely popular, I know I'm in the minority there, but I love Acevedo's voice from The Poet X, so I'm very, very intrigued to see how that voice is going to translate to an adult audience and what this is going to look like. But I think that this is going to be a very buzzy book, and I'm excited to dive in. And then we can't go a month without a book set in the Fae realm. I'm starting to wonder if I'm going to get burnt out on this, even though I have loved Fae books since I was a teenager. But obviously I think we can all kind of accurately track why we are seeing this resurgence now. But again, this has been a thing that's been popular for a long time, but we are unquestionably seeing more of a focus to the Fae realms with this kind of resurgence, opposed to a more urban fantasy focus, I would argue, in the Fae books of my teenage years. And so the book I'm talking about now is Omen of Ice by Jessica Cardo. This follows a protagonist who has been training her whole life to be a bodyguard for the Winter Fae, but when she gets to court, nothing is quite what she expects. There are tons of secrets and treachery, and most importantly, she's been assigned to the heir to the throne, who has no interest in her protection. So amidst attempting to navigate all of the court politics and the kind of double-sidedness that we know that exists within the courtly realm, only further emphasized or exacerbated by the Fae aspect of it all, there is also this kind of like love-hate relationship at the center of this, which I think we can all accurately assume is part of the reason that I'm attracted to this title. I know nothing beyond the blurb, but I am suitably intrigued. And then we have A Multitude of Dreams by Mara Rutherford, which is being billed as a young adult retelling of The Mask of the Red Death, which I think is further supported by the fact of the plague in this book being called the Mori Roja. I think that says what it needs to say, but I'm very intrigued by the idea of a Mask of the Red Death retelling. I have not admittedly read The Mask of the Red Death since I was in high school. It is a short story, so we're going to be expanding on it in some way, but I remember reading that story to talk about the symbolism of it. And so here it seems we have two characters that have been isolated in this castle, surviving this plague. There is some supernatural aspect to something going on, so I will be very interested to see if it has the same kind of movement, the kind of going through rooms and what rooms symbolize, which I think is possible if we are looking at this idea of the space and the castle, and if we're moving through this deserted area. There is also potentially spoilers in the like Goodreads tags on this. I guess we'll find out. I surely don't know because I haven't read it yet, so beware of that if you don't want to be spoiled, potentially. But amidst all of the retellings, this year I finally got my Scarlet Pimpernel retelling, which I admittedly have not read yet, but I did buy it finally. And those two tellings may be linked, if the spoiler is correct, by something that is not at all in either, to my recollection, Mask of the Red Death original text. But I think the thematic exploration of Mask of the Red Death is really pertinent for right now, so I'm very interested to see how this is going to be translated. I'm intrigued by the idea of it being a little bit more of a kind of supernaturally gothic young adult romance in some ways as well, but I'm intrigued into how that thematic exploration is transposed on top of that. I want both. You don't have to give up one or the other in my book for either to resonate, but I'm very intrigued by how these two are going to marry together for this one, and if we are going to get more kind of contemporary commentary from this retelling, or the fact that we are retelling this. In that case, it's whether the fantasy realm of it all is completely escapist, or if it makes clear that there is that kind of layer of cultural commentary for now as well, as we saw in The Mask of the Red Death, and as feels as pertinent now as The Mask of the Red Death was at its time, though again, I have not read it since high school, so we'll probably need to revisit in combination with that book. And then we have, surprise, surprise, a nonfiction title I am going to need to read off. So we have Flirting with Danger, The Mysterious Life of Marguerite Harrison, Socialite Spy by Janet Wallach. And so this is following a woman who was born during the height of the Gilded Age, was married and widowed very early. So after she was widowed, she became a socialite reporter, but also applied to be a spy and landed or entered German society after the end of World War I. And so she was moving in these circles and accurately able to predict things like the arrival of World War II. And she was also caught out as a spy at one point and basically forced to become a double agent, but then having to try and balance the appearance of being a double agent enough that she didn't lose her life, but also still not betraying her country. And just, I'm fascinated by the idea of this. I think the concept of spies isn't quite what it once was, but remembering that there are people moving about in society that may have ulterior motives or different motivations, but also additionally the kind of way that this persona as a socialite allowed her, presumably, because I haven't read this, to move about in different circles and to be underestimated in certain scenarios. And I think that we would probably see the same today, whether it be from socialites or influencers or people as a society that we tend to discredit easier, but are moving about under the radar and able to really accurately predict these larger events and exist against the backdrop of these larger events. But then also thinking about living a life that may look so full on the outside, but be pure deception at the same time. And also the way that women are able to exist in these spaces, to be unassuming, to be discredited in a lot of ways. So I don't know, maybe it is just the young woman that once upon a time watched Alias. After a certain point, even that got a little too much for me in terms of the suspension of disbelief there, but once upon a time I really liked Alias. So I think the reality here will be very interesting to me. And then last for the first, because as usual, I'm just babbling away, we've got Kiss the Girl by Zoraida Cordova, which is the third in the Disney Meant to Be retelling romance series. I have so far only read the Beauty and the Beast retelling by Jasmine Guillory in this series. I need to swing back and read Julie Murphy's. I really want to. I meant to check it out on Hoopla, but the audiobook didn't look long enough to be the full book, so I need to investigate that. But this is the Little Mermaid retelling, and it follows a woman, Ariel, who is part of a kind of pop girl group with her sisters, and she escapes and encounters Eric, who is part of an up-and-coming rock band and becoming part of that world for a period. The copy on this for the blurb is excellent in terms of its references. I will be interested to see how it ties references in throughout the book. But yeah, the series seems fun so far. Again, I've only read the one, but they are pulling in really exciting names for these projects, and so I'm interested to see where it will go. I'm interested to see if the tone and the heat levels carry across the series, or if it's a little bit more independent to the author that's in charge of the project. I don't know. So we'll see what we get here, but it is kind of a mix mesh-up of like a rom-com retelling and a more traditional romance novel. Obviously, the beats have to fall a little bit more in line with the story in some ways, so there is a predictability to certain things. However, there were more deviations with the Beauty and the Beast retelling than I anticipated, so there is that as well. And I did talk about that one a little bit more in depth in a vlog earlier this year. If I think to, I will link it. And then we move on to August 8th, and we're gonna start right out of the gate with one of my most anticipated books for the month, which is Bridge by Lauren Bukes. Now, I have not read Lauren Bukes's, I believe 2020 was her last book, and I need to swing back to that. But there was a time when Lauren Bukes held me and everyone I worked with at the bookstore in an absolute chokehold. There was that time in the mid-2000s, particularly with Shining Girls and Broken Monsters, where she was just really at the height of things. And I have gone back into her backlist and read what she's published since Broken Monsters, obviously. But there was something really interesting and of the moment and kind of genre bending about her thrillers at that time that had these kind of supernatural, odd elements. And so Bridge feels like it's going to be a little bit of a return to that, and it's going to be following interdimensional travel exploration. So it follows this mother-daughter duo, and the mother has recently passed, and the daughter comes back in contact with the thing that both at one point kind of connected them, but ultimately divided them, called the dream worm. And this seems to be the kind of conduit for interdimensional travel. And so the daughter then is exploring these dimensions and kind of trying to find out who she is and who she should be in this reality based on all of these other realities that take her to so many different places, and then also trying to figure out if there is any reality where her mother is still alive, but that there is a cost to this interdimensional travel and that there are other people in search of this technology. I don't know if technology is the right word. I don't know how we are approaching this, whether it is a little bit more supernatural, whether it's a little bit more sci-fi. I think anytime you have interdimensional travel, it's going to be a kind of bleeding of the two in some ways. So I'm really interested to kind of return to this kind of thriller, supernatural kind of place with her, and I'm very, very excited to see what this is going to be. This is an example of a novel that makes me regret that I'm no longer a bookseller in this case, because I would have loved to talk about this with my coworkers. We all had very firm ideas of what our favorite Lauren Bukes novel was. At the time, it was really split between Shining Girls and Broken Monsters, so I would be very interested to know all of my former coworkers' opinions on this, because we really liked things that were kind of subtly weird. I was amongst my people at that store. And then we have Unnecessary Drama by Nina Kedwood. This looks like it could go either way for me, in that I could really, really love it, or it could be just past plausible for me and I could live in that like secondhand embarrassment realm, because it follows a woman who is placed in university housing with her high school nemesis. So it does sound like it's going to be in the new adult realm. The enemies to lovers thing is obviously part of what's drawing me in. I do love a good like historical rivalry. The thing that I'm a little unsure about is like, what is the plotting, what is the contrivance that gets them in the same house? I do believe the author is Australian and the book is set in Australia, to my knowledge, and I don't know if housing works differently there. I personally, or at least at this time, can't think of many plausible scenarios that would put first-year college students of the opposite gender into housing together, but at the same time, I really do enjoy that forced proximity. This would be my absolute nightmare, to be clear, and I don't necessarily know, at least from the blurb, what makes them enemies. Did he tease her? Was he her academic rival? There are different dynamics there, right? So I'm very interested in what that is. I'm the most intrigued by academic rival, but we'll see what we get. I am reserving my skepticism because it does look like it's gotten some great reception so far, so I'll be interested to see what the conversation continues to be after release and if I like it. And then we have Under the Influence by Noelle Crooks, which by the rule of threes really makes me think that we're having a moment with influencers and cults and kind of exploring that overlap there, and cults and cultish thinking in the modern age, this kind of fragmentation of communities, all very interesting and all things I'm very interested in. And so this follows a protagonist who has been with a publishing company, is not making much money, because as we know from the HarperCollins strike, publishing employees don't make much money. And as we know by the news recently, the publishing industry has been hit by a lot of layoffs, a lot of issues. And so we have a lot of really overworked, undervalued employees being taken advantage of. And what are overworked, undervalued people really primed for? Cults. And so our protagonist gets caught up with like a self-help guru type influencer who has a strong community that this protagonist moves across the country to be a part of, and just what that community is. It really is vindicating and admittedly hyperbolizing a lot of my ideas of self-help, which I've talked about some, especially in my video about like self-help books that aren't self-help books, because I personally don't respond well to self-help books because I feel like it's often, as I've said before, regurgitated platitudes without action items. It's just like feel-good buzzy words without the substance underneath. And oftentimes we're seeing people without like licensure to talk about these topics kind of filling this void. So I don't know, based on the blurb, a couple of like self-help type gurus spring to mind, but I'm not gonna name any names because I don't know. We're talking about the idea, not specific people here, but between this, Natural Beauty, and The Glow, which I do have on hold at the library, and I'm getting higher up on that hold list, I'm very interested in what all of these three have in conversation with each other, especially because Natural Beauty and The Glow seem to be focused more on like beauty lifestyle influencers, and then this book seems to be more like lifestyle self-help influencer, which all live kind of under the same umbrella. But I think, like I've said before when talking about these other books in their anticipated videos, that we are really now having these conversations about like online culture in a way that I'm really interested to see that finally bleeding into books. Not that we haven't yet before this moment, but more that especially with these three books, we're starting to see that shift into the mainstream conversation, and I'm very interested in having that conversation. And then we have Marry Me by Midnight by Felicia Grossman, which is the start of a new historical romance series, and it is a Jewish historical romance. And it takes place in 1832, and our protagonist Isabel has to get married to kind of cement her place in her father's business after his death with his business partners. And so she enlists the help of Aaron, who is the synagogue custodian, to help her kind of vet her suitors and make sure that there aren't any unspoken or unknown allegiances to one particular family, so that she can kind of protect her own business interests. But I think we know based on romance rules where this is going to go. And then we have Pet by Catherine Chidgey, which is a Europa edition set in New Zealand in the 80s, and it follows a 12-year-old girl who is really enthralled by her charismatic teacher, but then a thief starts targeting the school, and all of these things are somehow tied together, as well as circling or bringing in larger political and social ideas. So part of me thought of Jawbone when I read this, but obviously there are some major thematic and like just logistical deviations there, but I'm very interested to see or to read if that kind of like obsession reads through in similar ways to in Jawbone, though while obviously having different shades and colors there. Then we have The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store by James McBride, which follows a small community in 1972 where a skeleton is found at the bottom of a well, and then the blurb circles back to talk about this small community of predominantly Black and Jewish Americans and how they live on the outskirts of kind of white society at this time, but how they really take care of their own and how they kind of band together to protect a deaf child from being institutionalized. So there's no indication in the blurb of moving back and forth between time, but I will be very interested to see how that's handled. The kind of introduction in the blurb made me think immediately of The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead, which is obviously a beautiful and devastating story. And I want to read the end of the blurb to you because I think it articulates the kind of explorations of this book much better than I can, period, let alone not having read the book yet. So it says, as these characters' stories overlap and deepen, it becomes clear how much the people who live on the margins of white Christian America struggle and what they must do to survive. When the truth is finally revealed about what happened on Chicken Hill and the part the town's white establishment played in it, McBride shows us that even in dark times, it is love and community, heaven and earth that sustain us. So I think especially right now, when we are having a lot of discourse about the idea of small towns and community, I think that this is going to be an incredibly important, insightful, and moving book. I'm really excited to read it. So yeah, and then shifting tones in a way that I really should have plotted out separately, but to be completely transparent, I am usually just like writing down books as I come across them, and I really probably should map this out better. But next we have Tall, Duke, and Scandalous by Amy Rose Bennett. At least it's always a surprise. This follows a heroine who was jilted by her betrothed after an accident left her face scarred, and in the wake of this, she's kind of settled into her grandfather's bookstore and writes newspaper columns. But when the future of the bookstore is threatened, who else is there to help than a duke with a reputation? So interested to see what this will be. I don't think this is from a series I've read yet, but I believe the series is the Byronic series, so maybe I need to give it a try. All right, and then we are moving right along to August 15th. We have Spin a Black Yarn by Josh Malerman. I have not read any Josh Malerman since Bird Box. I'm very proud of myself there for not saying admittedly, but I haven't. So this is a collection of novellas, and I'm very interested to see how his voice translates to the novella format. I think it will work really well. I'm very intrigued by this, and I think it will be just a nice little sweet spot for some spooky tales as we kind of transition into fall. I am ready for fall. I didn't think I would say that. Well, I always am ready for fall because it's my favorite. I don't care how basic that makes me. But this year has moved very quickly. It's just this last month has been so dang uncomfortable, and we started out so mild. You know what? I'm gonna quit complaining about the weather like the Midwesterner I am and move it along. Next, we have another novella, this time a singular novella, it looks like, from T. Kingfisher, and it is another in her like fairy tale series. It follows Toadling, who was stolen to fairyland as a child, and when she reaches age, she is asked for a favor from the fairies to return home and offer a blessing on a child. Centuries later, a knight encounters a wall covered in brambles and has heard of a curse that Toadling is determined to protect. So based on that, and not having read anything else, I'm assuming a kind of Briar Rose retelling, reimagining. We'll see what we get. Then we have Labyrinth's Heart by M.A. Carrick, the third in the Rook and Rose series. The first in this series was The Mask of Mirrors, which I talked about in a Future Friday many moons ago, so don't judge it too harshly if you go back to it. And the second being The Liar's Knot, which I have not read yet, and I have been feeling kind of guilty about because I really enjoyed The Mask of Mirrors, and I thought this was a duology, so in some ways maybe it's good that I hadn't read the second yet, because I do need to revisit this world so I can just do them both at once. Now granted, these are hefty, but to my recollection the font was pretty big in the physical copy. I read the first digitally, which worked wonderfully. I had checked the second one out from the library at some point, and the heft of it was part of the reason I didn't get to it in that format, just because it wasn't going to be comfortable for me to hold. You know, for like the before you fall asleep gremlin reading where you're lucky that your e-reader isn't falling directly onto your face. Anyway, very excited about this one. If you recall from the first book, it did have like little sprinkles of that kind of like Scarlet Pimpernel-y type thing going on with like the masked vigilantes. So maybe like a little Scarlet Pimpernel meets a little Zorro with a lot of high fantasy. So very intrigued to revisit this world. I was kind of shocked when I went back to the books on Goodreads because I thought that they had many more readers than it looks like they have ratings. So definitely need to revisit this simply because I think it needs more buzz as well. So hopefully the second two books are as compelling as the first. I remember the first had some twists I legitimately didn't see coming. So very excited for the next two. And then we have Information Desk by Robin Schiff, which is a poetry collection. I actually have, I believe, 3 poetry collections this month. I know, who am I, right? But this, according to the blurb, is a book-length poem in 3 parts set at the information desk of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So very intrigued by that whole concept, so we'll definitely be checking this one out. And then we're moving on to August 22nd. This is a 5 Tuesday month, so stay with me here. I promise I'm trying to go at least at a decent speed. The first book this week is He Who Drowned the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. I don't have a whole lot to say about this one because despite the fact that I bought She Who Became the Sun many years ago, I have not read it yet, but I've heard nothing but great things about that book and we'll get to it eventually. You know how the TBR looks, so definitely have this on my radar. Now I know that I can just knock them out at the same time because I did think that that was a standalone, so clearly my procrastination is paying off in some way, but I anticipate this being incredibly buzzy the second half of this year, so we're gonna keep our eye on it. And then we have In Charm's Way by Lana Harper, the 4th in the Witches of Thistle Grove series, which I had only been 1 book behind on, and now I'm 2 books behind on again. I am a little nervous about this series simply because I've been enjoying it, don't get me wrong, but this is the second book in this series we've had released this year, and I'm not worried about the series itself necessarily, but like the expectation that is potentially being set in publishing right now. Like, are they expecting Harper to give them 2 books a year? Is that just the pace she's writing at? Which, if that's the case, great, golden. I just don't want us building up a system where we're burning our authors out as much as I love getting more books. At the same time, there are a lot of books on my TBR. I'm gonna be fine if I have to wait like an extra 6 months for the book. That being said, I will probably catch up on these in the spooky season, and it looks like this one is going to be another sapphic in this series, so very exciting. And speaking of exciting, we have one of my most anticipated books of the second half of the year, Knockout by Sarah MacLean, which is Imogen and Tommy's anticipated book. Now, I live in fear a little bit of this book. One, because we have clearly been building up to this one within the Hell's Bells series. We have got Tommy and Imogen through all of the other books so far. This is the couple that we are supposed to be anticipating, and we are going to get it. It's going to be juicy. It's going to be delicious. I'm going to love every minute of it. Why I'm a little afraid is, one, just that it's over, but two, we still have the Duchess's book. And Sarah MacLean is pretty notorious for leaving the most anticipated book, or the book with the biggest kind of revelation, for last. And we haven't really had a whole lot in terms of revelations about the Duchess yet. And me and my friend Kelsey from Romance Book Club have had so many text exchanges about who the Duchess could be, because it feels like someone that already exists within the MacLean universe potentially, but we can't figure it out. And it's one of those things too, where we're like, the minute we know who it is, we're gonna be standing in the corner beating our head against the wall, like, how did we not figure this out? So I'm both so excited for this romance that I have been anticipating now for 2 years, especially because Imogen and Tommy are thrown together by Imogen's family, basically pulling him in to act as a bodyguard for her. And keep in mind, after Heartbreaker, he has already kind of been sniffing after the bells. So very excited to see what we're gonna get there. There's going to be lots of banter, there's going to be lots of tension, there are going to be a lot of explosions, literally, because Imogen likes to blow things up, which does make me question why the book is called Knockout. It makes me wonder, it seems like it talks about Tommy having kind of built himself up. Are we gonna circle back Tommy to maybe one of the previous series? Is he connected to the Bare Knuckle Bastards in some way? Because it feels weird that the title is Knockout and not something kind of indicative of explosions. Or maybe it's simply that Imogen's impact on Tommy is a little bit more blunt and straightforward. I don't know. But I think it's unquestionable there are going to be sparks there, and then we are going to find something out at the end of this book regarding the Duchess that is going to make our jaws drop, and then we're going to have to sit with it for a year, and it's going to be one of those really epic second chance romances that is angsty and heartfelt and just like tears us open. So I'm excited for it and a little bit afraid, as I should be. And then to continue the trend of anticipated follow-ups or re-entering worlds we love, we have Rook by William Ritter. I did not know to expect another book within the Jacobi universe, but we've got it. Here we're following Abigail kind of after everything that happened in the Jacobi series. It's been so long since I've read that series, I probably will need to kind of refamiliarize myself, but it's that supernatural investigations angle, and here Abigail has kind of taken center stage. She is no longer the apprentice, obviously after some of the happenings of the series as well, but I just absolutely adore this world. But in case you didn't read the original Jacobi series, which I would encourage you to do if you like the sound of this, Jacobi is kind of like Supernatural meets Doctor Who meets Sherlock, very much of the moment of the like 2015-ish Tumblr days, but in the less messy way. So if you like how that sounds, pick up the Jacobi series and then you'll be ready when Rook comes out. And then we've got 2 more poetry collections, the first being Plantains in Our Becoming by Melania Luisa Marte, and this explores Afro-Latina identity and the Black diaspora, particularly centered around the Dominican Republic and Haiti. And then additionally in the poetry realm, we have I Done Clicked My Heels 3 Times by Taylor Bias, which according to the blurb takes inspiration from The Wiz to explore a woman's journey into adulthood on the south side of Chicago, so I am so excited and interested in the framing of this collection as well. And then with that, we have made it to August 29th, the last new release Tuesday of the month. I know we did it, you'll be free soon, but thanks for hanging in with me this long if you have. So the first book of the week is My Roommate is a Vampire by Jenna Levine. Sounds like exactly what the cover says it is. Her roommate is a vampire. I believe it's a romance, it's set in Chicago. The blurb specifically mentions a beautiful Chicago neighborhood, and I want to know what neighborhood the blurb is specifically calling out there. So definitely interested in this one, especially because this one feels like it's harkening back to some of the romantic comedies, like supernatural romances I was reading when I was a teen, like that Mary Janice Davidson, Charlene Harris kind of romantic supernatural book. This feels like it's going to be a little bit more rom-com-y, so maybe a little bit more Mary Janice Davidson, but remember True Blood was a lot darker than the Sookie Stackhouse books were. Like there was darkness there, but there was always that humor in the books that didn't always show up in the show. Granted, I never finished the show. Don't judge me too harshly. I didn't have HBO. Moving right along, we have the highly anticipated sophomore novel from Isabel Cañas, author of last year's The Hacienda. This year, she is giving us Vampires of El Norte, which I think, unsurprisingly, will feature vampires, though the blurb doesn't really give us all the details there, but it also features lost lovers. One of our protagonists thinks the other had died. They hadn't. Speculation there onto what may be going on based on the title, but we don't really know yet. I mean, some people probably know because I'm assuming advanced reads have gone out, but I personally do not know. And I'm also excited about this one because it seems to be following in the tradition of the Hacienda in terms of its really excellent kind of atmospheric setting, but also bringing in that Mexican history. And I think it will be great for people, even if you didn't read the Hacienda last year, but maybe you loved The Daughter of Dr. Moreau by Silvia Moreno Garcia. If you like Silvia Moreno Garcia, I definitely think that you should give Isabel Cañas a try. It definitely has like that gothic kind of romance feel that, especially for readers of Mexican Gothic or The Daughter of Dr. Moreau, will really, I think, translate well. And I'm really excited to see how Cañas' voice continues to develop, and am very intrigued by the setting and the supernatural aspect, and again, that kind of Gothic romance feel. And then we have Her Radiant Curse by Elizabeth Lim, author of Six Crimson Cranes. Again, have I read the sequel to Six Crimson Cranes yet, even though I loved Six Crimson Cranes? No, because I'm behind on literally everything. I believe the second one is The Dragon's Promise. This is a completely new book. It follows two sisters. One of the sisters, Chani, who I believe is our protagonist, has been sacrificed by her father to the demon witch, and her face has been changed in to a serpent's face. Meanwhile, her sister is notoriously beautiful, and her father sets out this like challenge to marry her off. And so Chani has basically taken on this role of protecting her sister, and this involves facing off against a particularly cruel suitor, which puts her on this more epic quest, potentially. It's giving me a little bit, just from the blurb, the feel of The Two Princesses of Bel-Air, which absolutely ripped out my entire heart and soul when I was very young. If you don't know that book, it's by Gail Carlson Levine and is right up there with Ella Enchanted for me, and I believe I read it before Ella Enchanted. But it is adventurous, involves great quests and magic, and a little heartbreaking. So I'm hoping for the adventurous, the quests and magic, maybe a little sprinkle of romance, and maybe we could like hold the heartbreak this go around. But I'm very intrigued to see what this is going to be. I loved Lim's voice in Six Crimson Cranes. There was an excellent fairy tale quality to that book, not just because it was a retelling of a fairy tale. And so I'm very excited if this continues in that vein and we get some more of these like lush fairy tale-esque stories. And then we have I Feed Her to the Beast and the Beast is Me by Jamison Shea, and it follows a young woman amidst the cutthroat world of the Parisian ballet who is constantly being overlooked amidst her more elite peers despite her perfectionist tendencies. And so in an effort to get her shot and also a little retribution, she makes a deal with what is described in the blurb as a river of blood. The blurb also describes this as a villain origin story. And so it definitely feels like it's going to have this kind of darkness and energy pulsating underneath it, and not just in reference to a subterranean river of blood, but then also how this deal with presumably kind of like a Faustian bargain in some way kind of corrupts our protagonist, but also makes her a target even as she is achieving all she dreamed of. So I'm very interested in what kind of twists this is going to offer, what kind of commentary this is going to offer, and how it builds out our protagonist as an anti-hero of sorts, presumably because it says it is a villain origin story, which leads me to believe we're going to be playing in shades of gray here. So very interested to see what this is going to be. And then we've made it to the last book of the month, which is another nonfiction. I'm going to read off the extended title for you now: Mother Tongue: The Surprising History of Women's Words by Jenny Nuttall, which seems like it's going to be exactly what it says, an exploration of, the blurb specifically mentions feminist language, but I don't think it is referring or using that word in the way we would think of it today, but more so in relation to exploring language related to women. It does say in the blurb that we are going to be tracing back to Old English, so this is going to be a very Eurocentric idea or exploration, which does make sense in context of predominantly exploring English. The book title or extended title doesn't necessarily explicitly call that out, but based on everything I'm reading, that is how I am interpreting it. So very interested to take a look at this one and just to see what angle we're coming at the exploration from here. I of course love these kind of like really dialed in kind of micro histories, especially where they kind of bleed together with the exploration of historical social issues and just how we conceptualize of ourselves in the modern moment in comparison with how we have conceptualized of ourselves in the past. So very interested to take a look at this one, but that is where we are going to end off the month. So as usual, this is just a kind of broad overview, a small selection of titles, believe it or not, of what I've got my eye on. So there are things that I have missed. Let me know what you are excited about, whether I've touched on it today or not. You know the drill. We're here to be excited about books together, so let me know. Thanks for hanging out. As always, like, subscribe, comment, whatever your heart is feeling. Any interaction is appreciated, not gonna lie, so do whatever you're feeling. But thanks for hanging out. Like I said, read something good, most importantly, and as always. But yeah, bye.